Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. And on behalf of the BSI, I would like to welcome you to the Nature, Environment Law and Biodiversity Net Gain for the Built Environment webinar. And I do appreciate that is a long title. We're aware that this is an incredibly busy month for all of you, and I therefore want to thank you not only for freeing up time in your busy schedules, but also for your questions and feedback to this workshop. Before I start with introductions, next slide please. Before I start with the introductions, I just want to make you aware of some of the housekeeping, including that this is a listen-only webinar that's being recorded. And the other housekeeping you'll see on this slide. Next slide, please. My name is Daan van der Bekker. I'm the Head of Sustainability for BSI. And today I'm joined by an amazing team of panelists. And in a moment, you will hear from Julia Baker, the Head of Nature Services for Mott MacDonald, and one of the authors of the little book of Biodiversity Net Gain. From Adrian Baudrumont, the Senior Research Manager for CIRIA, the Construction Industry Research and Information Association, and from Tom Butterworth, the Regional Nature Director for Arab Consulting, and also one of the authors of the little book for Biodiversity Net Gain. This session is organized as part of the BSI Net Zero Week. And the Net Zero Week is a week of webinars by each sector in the BSI Knowledge Solutions team. And those sectors include transport, mobility, ESG, healthcare, digital, food, energy, and obviously built environment. And this is the third time that we are organizing this week. And we aim to provide your organization with the latest sector insights on the opportunities and challenges of the net zero transition. And the objective of today's session on nature really is to raise the profile of recent and ongoing policy developments impacting the built environment industry. And secondly, to amplify the role of standards in achieving nature positive outcomes. So I'd like to start with saying a few words on three things. Firstly, what is BSI? Secondly, the link to the international standards infrastructure. And finally, the role of standards in achieving net zero and nature positive. Let's start with the BSI. The BSI, as you probably know, is the UK's national standards body. We have a memorandum of understanding in place between BSI and the British government, establishing us as the national standards body for the UK. We are the oldest and probably the largest standards setting body in the world. And our mission is to create and maintain standards that ensure quality, safety, and sustainability across all sectors. And in our function as NSB, we publish some 3,500 standards each year, underpinned by a collaborative approach where we always aim for consensus. We work very closely together with experts, with businesses, with government entities, both in the UK and internationally, to create standards that are fit for purpose and globally recognized. And I think here it is key to understand that we are impartial, we are independent, apolitical, and we are profit for purpose. What we aim to do is to build trust. One thing that differentiates us from other standard setting bodies is that we are part of an international quality infrastructure. As the UK's national standards body, we represent UK economic and social interests across all European and international standards organizations, including ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, the International Electrotechnical Commission, and a range of European standards organizations. So the BSI really is the voice of the UK in international standard making, and that implies firstly, a broad representation. ISO standards are internationally recognized and applicable across 171 countries. It implies global recognition. The whole standard developing process internationally is also consensus-based, which means that developing and emerging markets have an equal voice. And thirdly, there's an opportunity for independent assurance, which will contribute to addressing greenwashing concerns. And finally, there's an opportunity for real economy adoption. So we believe there's a role for standards in achieving a net zero and a nature positive economy. And I think we are all aware, we all know that climate change leads to unprecedented environmental and socio-economic challenges. And despite the fact that the need for a sustainable and net zero future has never been greater, there is a lack of progress. We are simply not going fast enough. What we also know is that the role of standards in the sustainable transformation, the transition, is undeniable. Standards can drive systemic change, particularly for the critical mass of companies. And that's critical mass of companies, so the companies sort of below the level of the multinationals, the smaller ones. They make up 98, 99% of the UK companies. And if they don't move, there will be no sustainable transformation. So we at BSI, as one of the largest standard developers in the world, we feel we have a key role to play. And that is not only in developing standards, it's also in convening, in enabling, in connecting, in sharing knowledge, and particularly in translating government policy and private sector strategy into action on the ground, impactful action. And finally, we know we need a holistic approach to sustainability. A sustainable transformation, the one that we're aiming for, is not driven by one standard alone, not even by a series of standards. We know that standards, as such, are not the solution. Standards are part of the solution and an important part. And we therefore feel that our focus should be to build a net zero economy with integrated solutions on climate and biodiversity underpinned by sustainable finance. A net zero economy that is socially inclusive with governance structures operating for the long-term benefit of society. And that is the role we play. That is what my sustainability team is working on a daily basis. And that's why for us, nature, biodiversity is so incredibly important and one of the key pillars under our strategy. But we can't do or achieve anything of this without experts like you. And I'm therefore very pleased to be joined today by Julia, by Adrian, and by Tom, who will now provide an update on their respective topics. And Julia, can I invite you to start with an overview of the B&G, the Biodiversity Net Gain policy development in England? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And it's great to be here. Right, do you mind sharing the control again, just in case that doesn't seem to have worked? Or just click on next slide, please. There we go. So, everyone, it's lovely to be here. And on the 12th of February 2024, the then government claimed a world first. They said development in England are now required to deliver 10% biodiversity net gain when building new housing, industrial or commercial development. So this is most developments seeking planning permission. Next slide, please. And when you work in mandatory biodiversity net gain, I work with engineers, with architects, with landscape designers, and I get a lot of questions saying, well, Julia, if we are building this development, this road or railway or transport or energy project, what exactly are we building when it comes for mandatory biodiversity net gain? And if you really unpack biodiversity net gain, is development that results in more or better quality habitats. So we're building habitats. Yes, we're building a school or a railway, but we're building woodlands, scrub, grasslands, and we're following the mitigation hierarchy. But essentially, biodiversity net gain comes into the fact that we are building habitats. And that's really the place to understand and start with when it comes to biodiversity net gain. Next slide, please. Now, if you go to all of the government guidance and literature on biodiversity net gain, you'll see the metric, you'll see all these government guidance, and you might see various reports about biodiversity net gain. My favourite piece of guidance is this one, and it's quite hidden away, so you do have to find it. But I think after all of the layers and layers of biodiversity net gain, and especially about the metric, this one really speaks to what mandatory biodiversity net gain is. It's designing habitats. So it's great. It says when designing on-site habitat creation or enhancement, you'll need to consider whether it's possible, and questions to consider like, do you have the right soils for that lowland grassland meadow? Or is there an access point for the equipment needed? Are there going to be pets, my favourite, that might affect your B&G plans? So yes, and we'll get into the biodiversity metric. There's so much about biodiversity net gain that we truly need, and we need to measure those outcomes. But if we think about the heart of biodiversity net gain, it's really important to note that it's about development that avoids and reduces habitat clearance and then create wildlife-rich habitats. Next slide, please. I love this question. And working in biodiversity net gain, and my colleagues on the call have also worked in biodiversity net gain. We've had it for 6 months, and I get asked so often, well, has it been successful? How is biodiversity net gain going? It has only been 6 months. And let's definitely ask the question about the success of biodiversity net gain, because we need to understand that and to really challenge ourselves to make sure that we are delivering biodiversity net gain as best as we can. But it's been 6 months. What I can do is I can tell you what my experience has been of biodiversity net gain to date. I have never seen this amount of avoiding and reducing habitat clearance as I have seen. And you won't read this. You'll read about biodiversity net gain, you'll read about the metrics, you'll read about local planning authorities, and you'll read about all of these important aspects of biodiversity net gain. But you probably won't read what I have experienced firsthand, and many of my colleagues, is that never before have we had really the power of the legislation to say, actually, can we build this project? Can we design, build, and maintain this project with less habitat clearance? And then when you have that, you have such a lovely solution to your biodiversity net gain, because chances are that habitat might be in need of enhancement, and then that could be part of your biodiversity net gain solution. So for me, what I've been experiencing is that avoidance and reduction that I've never experienced before. I've also experienced early conversations, like really, really early on, and much more so to just the level of depth of those conversations that we go into. I mean, this time last year, if I was at a feasibility stage, and I would have been delighted if someone even had B&G on their radar, and they might have asked us to do a desk-based study. Now I'm in feasibility assessments when they're asking our ecologists to go out on site, and it is so early. And they know they're going to have to update the habitat maps and things like that, but they want to know that detail of understanding. So bringing biodiversity net gain much earlier into, okay, how can we do this? Where's the solution? When you answer that question early, you can then get into the ways that biodiversity net gain will add true value to your project. And that's definitely where we want to go. Next slide, please. There is something that we need to consider though, and I think it is really useful to look at what we have to date, and especially to look at the really interesting policies that are emerging in Scotland about net positive and Wales about net benefits. Because if we look at biodiversity net gain and we have that kind of 10% B&G, it is required to be there for 30 years. So if we think about that, ultimately, that's a lovely bringing in terms of, well, we need to think about climate change. UK Met Office is some of the best climate projection data in the world, and it's really available. And there's some fantastic climate resilience team thinking about climate resilience for the infrastructure that we build. So it's a simple question of kind of knocking on their door and welcoming them into the B&G design, saying, okay, what are you seeing in terms of the climate projection? What do you see as the climate risks? And let's build in resilience to what we need. But there's a couple of foundations, a couple of building blocks as well. We absolutely need more resources for local planning authorities. That's not just a biodiversity net gain issue, if you like. I love the way that biodiversity net gain is highlighting this. But we absolutely need the funding and the support and the resources for local planning authorities, because it's coming through, it's been landed through the planning system. So that's something. I think there's a need for standardisation, and shout out to the British Standard, who produced the first British Standard on biodiversity net gain. That was before it was mandatory. But we really need that standardisation in terms of the quality of data, the competencies. We have these headlines from the law, but that's our job in industry. And that's my final point about what's needed, responsibilities. There's a whole raft of layers of who is responsible for making biodiversity net gain successful. And yes, it will start off with government, and then there's a role for local government, and there's absolutely a role for industry in terms of whether biodiversity net gain is truly successful, and the way that we set the benchmark of what's good practice and the way that we work towards that. but we haven't mapped that out yet. Who is responsible for what when it comes to mandatory biodiversity net gain? And that's going to be a key starting point. Next slide, please. There's a couple of other things as well that I think, and particularly learning from Scotland and Wales in terms of their policy narrative, you cannot have the recovery enhancement of nature when you decrease the absorption of greenhouse gases by the natural environment. And it's just inherent. You know, climate change is one of the biggest drivers of biodiversity loss. So if we're designing biodiversity net gain over 30 years, but we're not looking at the change in carbon sequestration from before to after with biodiversity net gain, has B&G truly increased carbon sequestration, then that's no net gain. We're just chipping away at the sequestration rates of our natural environment, and the law doesn't ask us to do that. And I'm lucky in my company, we've actually looked at the carbon impact of biodiversity net gain, and it's not always positive, especially when you're losing habitat and you're achieving biodiversity net gain by enhancing an existing habitat. You can still end up with a carbon debt. And I really welcome the policy narratives that are coming out around the UK, a much more joined up approach between nature, climate and resilience. It's one puzzle to solve. You know, and biodiversity net gain is a great starting block, but we won't get very far if we just isolate it away from all the activities that we're doing for climate and all the things that we're doing for carbon and resilience. So we need to think about that holistic picture, which is biodiversity net gain, in ways that help us tackle climate change, and nature is one of the best places that we have to increase that greenhouse gas absorption. Next slide, please. The other point that's missing from the hard line of the legislation is the social impacts and the social value of biodiversity net gain. You'll see in the narrative, you know, there's a lot of talk about biodiversity net gain, and it's great, you know, you'll see some case studies, and often people look at B&G here and say, you know, let's enhance people access to nature. We first need to look at the baseline. So what was people's access to nature? And by access, it might be views or physical access or just the sense and feel of living around nature. What was that before biodiversity net gain? Then you can talk about what that was afterwards. You know, it's not just about that good news story. We need to think about the social impact of biodiversity net gain. And there's some really interesting work by Ian Bateman from Exeter University that shows how biodiversity net gain can actually help the rich get richer in a way. You know, if you're taking the green spaces away from members of the community, but then giving it and locking it away in one of those garden housing, you know, the new housing developments that are for certain richer members of society, we need to really recognise the social impact of biodiversity net gain. And this comes to a point. So if you go to local plans and policies, they'll often have a policy about, well, have you assessed the health and well-being impact of the development? And that's over here. And then over here, there'll be the B&G. But if you're assessing the health impacts of a development, that is now a development with biodiversity net gain. So what is the social impact of biodiversity net gain? And also we think about it. I mean, if I think, how can I best secure biodiversity net gain? We've talked about the need for resources within local planning authorities, and that's absolutely a need, but that needs to be really cemented for that to be truly reliable. We all know the difficulties of monitoring enforcement of developers, and there's, well, can we rely on developers? And we need that legislation and monitoring enforcement. But actually, if we design biodiversity net gain, and it's not going to be a silver bullet and right for every occasion, but when it is appropriate, for local people to have access to biodiversity net gain, for local people to have that value of biodiversity net gain, I'm thinking that's a really great way to secure biodiversity net gain over the 30 years, because it has that local interest, it has that local value to that community. So there's the risk of not looking at the social impacts of biodiversity net gain, but there's also the opportunities of when we do so for B&G in itself. And it must be careful, and it must be on balance with the biodiversity ambitions that we need to do, but there's a great opportunity there. Next slide, please. And finally, I think there's one thing that is absolutely really, really important that hopefully we can talk about later today. There's an absence of regulation of the biodiversity net gain markets, and maybe it's just my algorithm, but you go on LinkedIn, who's not selling habitat units? So there's a need for integrity. And there's so many lessons learned. From lessons learned from carbon that I really welcome the carbon community to give us their advice and their voice on this. But it is that one of the key aspects of the success of Biodiversity Net Gain will relate to the integrity that we can have in the Biodiversity Net Gain markets. My final slide, please. If you would like to know more, there's all these webinars, we put the links in there, and there's the guidance as well about Biodiversity Net Gain. But thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Julia. And I love the points about sort of realizing that this is a world first. And it would be interesting to explore a bit further the link between legislation and the fact that the legislation is there and that it already leads to avoiding habitat clearance. And the other thing that really strikes me is the social value of BNG and particularly how we can measure that. So thank you very much for that. Can I now hand over to Adrian for BNG requirements and resources for the built environment sector?
Thank you, Dan. And thank you, Julia, for the amazing presentation that you just gave, really hitting the nails on what is missing, what are the opportunities. And I think my presentation will follow up talking a little bit more about some of the requirements from Biodiversity Net Gain for the industry, but also trying to highlight some of the existing resources to help the industry navigate Biodiversity Net Gain. And I think that will be a great transition. Okay, here we go. All right, so I work at Syria, and we are the Construction Industry Research and Information Association. And we've been working around the biodiversity theme for quite some time. This is just a little bit of a background slide with some of the guidance that we've published along the years that are related to biodiversity. So you can see, like the bottom box here is the most critical one. It's those 3 guidance documents were created with AIMA and SAIM. The first one is the Good Practice Principles back in 2016. Those principles made their way into the BSI standard. And then we published the principles guidance document with examples. And then recently, we published the mandatory biodiversity net gain in England quick guide, which I will talk a little bit more in a few slides. Okay, so what is biodiversity net gain? If I quote DEFRA, BNG is an approach to development. It makes sure that habitats for wildlife are left in measurably better state than they were before the development. So I think the measurably is one of the keywords here. As Julia mentioned, this is a habitat-based type of regulation. And to do so, there is a statutory biodiversity metric tool developed by Natural England, which is really to measure the habitat prior to development with a suite of different conditions and things to assess for each of the habitats. And what you get as a result is a number of biodiversity units. And then you compare that, you run the tool again with your planned work, and you compare the pre and the post development. And then you need to achieve a minimum of 10% net gain. Something that Julia also mentioned, which is key to this regulation, is the 30 years maintenance for all habitat created or restored. So that's something that is something to keep in mind. It has to be correctly planned for maintenance for those 30 years to go. Now, the mitigation hierarchy as well, Julia mentioned it. This is also very well stated in the guidance document that I mentioned earlier. It's really the idea that avoiding impact is the priority. And then doing the biodiversity enhancement on site. If not fully achievable, then there are some off-site options, and at the last resort, there are some biodiversity credits available. All right, the next one now, here we go. So for what developments, you probably all know that for medium and large developments, it's been mandatory since February 2024 It's very recent for small developments since April, and national significant infrastructure projects are scheduled for November 2025. I invite you, if you have any questions, to take a look at the government websites. For that, there's a lot of resources for developers, for local planning authorities, with all of, a lot of level of details for biodiversity net gain and how to make it happen for your project. One thing that we've learned is that this is a multidisciplinary approach. When you start working on biodiversity, you need to bring in the proper disciplines around to make sure that you have the proper assessments and that you are planning correctly for habitats that will be successful in the long term. So it is very important to engage early with an ecologist. And here I have a little bit of some of the findings from the latest guidance that we released, which will be showcased on the next slide. But like, for example, at the pre-purchase stage, it's really important to have the ecologist engaged and to make sure that the BNG feasibility and opportunities are clearly laid out. So making sure what is the existing situation on site and then what can be done with it. At the design stage, a little bit later, then ecologist and landscape architect are critical, and that will finalize the baseline assessment. And then really starting to design what the development how can it look like in conjunction with the metrics needs. All right, a couple of challenges and opportunities. I think Julia mentioned those really well, but I'd like to maybe emphasize a couple of those. So first of all, biodiversity net gain is an approach based on habitat restoration. And this is like it's a focus on one topic, let's say, but there are many, many things that we need to do in order to be fully resilient. And so one of them is to go beyond biodiversity net gain. One of the next steps maybe is environmental net gain, which is really taking into account not only the biodiversity aspect of things, but also the wider natural capital benefits and the social aspect as well, as Julia mentioned, which is key and critical. Then there is the idea of going beyond those 10% and taking the opportunity to actually build more of this biodiversity within any development sites as much as possible, to not feeling like restrained by the 10% number, but trying to go beyond that. There's more and more different tools and targets to be achieved. And one of them is the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, which is taking more and more of a front row role in terms of really trying to assess and display what is being done at a company level. There's also something which is also linked to other work that we're doing at Syria, but it's the link with sustainable drainage systems and the link with planning early. And when we're planning early for BNG, we can also plan early for the drainage plan that goes with it. And sustainable drainage systems have blue and green elements that could work in conjunction. So BNG is an opportunity, but it can open to so much more than just the green aspect. Now, of course, some challenges. 30 years maintenance. Well, we just started on this legislation, so it's hard to say how this is going to go, but definitely something to really think of and to really design well to make sure that it's actually achievable. And then how to keep track throughout those 30 years, if there are changes in ownership or things like that, or management. So yeah, things to keep in mind. Then there is also the capacity constraints. We know how the industry is really hard to not only from the local planning authority side because of resources to actually review those applications, but also from the industry side of things in terms of finding the right ecologies for your project, the right landscape architect, and making it work with kind of a constrained landscape for that. So one of the questions that we always ask at Syria is there a need for more guidance on how to achieve BNG and maybe go beyond BNG for the construction industry and the built environment? So the latest one is this collaboration with Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, SAIM, and Institute on Environmental Management and Assessment, AIMA. As I mentioned, this is the last product of a series of guidance documents, which started back in 2016. So this latest one is really to take a step-by-step approach and to really clarify, in a very clear way, to state what is needed when you start a project to achieve your BNG goal. And not only does it does this, but it also brings in the different disciplines that you would need at each and every steps of your project. So that's a key document. It is available for free on Syria, AIMA, and SAIM websites. So I invite you to take a look at it. It's very short, but to the point. Now, another resource that I would like to point out is Syria Biodiversity Community of Practice, which is a group of practitioners that has been going on for quite a bit now. It started more than 10 years ago, and it was all about trying to encourage the industry to actually add biodiversity to their project. And this group is really to share knowledge and to understand what works, what does not. It's a peer-to-peer discussion environment, and it's really to try to understand the latest policy and the ones that are to be developed. One of the outcomes of this Biodiversity Community of Practice is the Big Biodiversity Challenge and Awards. And this one has been ongoing for 10 years as well, which means that on the website that you see on your screen, there is actually, this is a repository of 10 years worth of biodiversity related projects. And I'd like to point out that even though the biodiversity, the mandatory Biodiversity Net Gain is really recent, it's just since February. But the industry has been working towards it for the past years. And they've been using the biodiversity metric tool. They've been using those target goals, and some of them can be found into those entries to these biodiversity awards. So we hope that this really can serve as a repository of case studies to get inspired, to see what is possible, what works, what does not. And we aim to continue that. We actually have our biodiversity awards in a couple of days on Wednesday. This is a picture from last year at Kew Garden. This year we're going to be at the London Wetland Centre, and it's always it's great to see those very inspiring projects that are really putting biodiversity front and center into their project and developments. And that is it for me. Thank you so much.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Heidi. And I'm quite intrigued by the opportunities that you laid out. And I just have one very quick question. You mentioned environmental net gain and as being biodiversity net gain plus the wider natural capital benefit. And you mentioned that one of those can be social value. Can you just give one example of another natural capital benefit, something that adds on the BNG?
Yeah, of course. Well, so I mentioned, the suds and drainage, so that would be water quantity, and also the water quality that goes with it is the surface water is being filtered. But it's also the amenity features. It's also traffic calming. It's also air quality improvement. It's the list goes on. There's like so many added benefits on top of any blue and green infrastructure. So BNG can be seen as a starting point, as a first step. But then it's an opportunity to actually go beyond.
Well, it's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation. And so can we now move on to our third panelist, to Tom, who can provide also the international context. So over to you, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. And what a great opportunity to be here and pleasure to be speaking with everybody today. So yes, my name's Tom Butterworth. I work in Arup, and I've been working on a number of different projects with BSI, and we're going to talk about some of those today. So I'm going to take us back round to the standards themselves and what standards are already in play, what's being developed, and both BSI and internationally. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So we have a couple of standards already out in the wild, and some that have been out for quite a while. So we've got a code of practice for planning and development for biodiversity. Biodiversity net gain is critical. It's really important, but it's not everything that we need to do for our developments or for nature and for biodiversity. And BS for 2020 covers a whole range of requirements and approaches that we need to take for biodiversity across our planning work, and this covers the whole of the UK as well, which is really valuable and increasingly a diverse group of countries in terms of how we're working. Now you'll note that the title is for 2020. This was originally written with the Biodiversity 2020 targets in sight. Sadly, we missed those targets. We didn't hit those, and we've got a new set of targets to hit. So we are actually revising that, not just because we've got a new set of targets, but we're revising this and updating this standard because of the shifts and changes that we've seen in planning policy and the development world since 2013. It's moved really rapidly, and a document that's now 11 years old is definitely needing some revision. So keep an eye out for that, because we will have consultations and drafts of that coming out in the near future. The other standard that's well worth mentioning and having a look at is the Biodiversity Net Gain standard. You won't be surprised to hear that, given the conversations we've had today. This was written back in 2021, and so you can see the progression of this is significantly before the legislation. And again, it covers the whole of the UK, and perhaps we get an opportunity to say a little bit more about this later. This is not tied specifically to what's going on in England. This is about an approach that was set out and has been set out both internationally through what was the Business and Biodiversity Offsetting Programme, and then how that's been translated through the documents you've heard about, through those principles, through the guidance, and then into this standard. And yes, that's manifested in terms of legislation in England, but it also plays out across the UK through the different planning policies and so on that we're seeing developing and changing. The other piece that I'd say to this is that the way that this is set out follows the guidance that we've been talking about as well. So it follows the steps that we might be taking through development, and it uses the same terminology so that we've got a suite of documents that talk to one another really well. So can't recommend this strongly enough. And if you want to get a flavor for the Biodiversity Net Gain specification, then do have a look at this little book of biodiversity. The link is there for the little book. That's free to access and gives you a really nice overview that Joe Treweek, Julia and myself drafted recently. And I think it's a really nice summary of Biodiversity Net Gain. But this isn't all we're doing with the British standards on nature. If we move on to the next slide, please. We've got, as was alluded to, as Dan mentioned at the beginning, we've got some other flexes being developed. So this is around the markets that are being developed at the moment. We've got a lot of movement in biodiversity net gain and biodiversity net gain units and credits and so on. We've also got movement in terms of the carbon sphere and carbon credits, and we've got other markets being developed like nutrient markets and so on. Now, what we're doing here is we're developing, and this, I think this is really important to flag, that this is in partnership with the BSI, in partnership with DEFRA and the devolved administrations, as well as industry, to establish a set of a framework of standards to address barriers on investing in nature. This is going to be hugely valuable. We've got 701 already out in draft, and it's moving so quickly that we're actually got feedback and we're updating that as well. The reason it's called a flex is that we're able to update these and move them much more rapidly. And so we're looking at a second draft of 701 already. That's going to hold these overarching principles you can see in the diagram here. And then underneath that, we identify the elements that are additional that we need to look at in terms of making sure that we've got high integrity nature markets for biodiversity or for carbon or for nutrients, neutrality, nutrients in our water courses. And we can look at how we add certain key elements that are relevant for that. So I'm working on the biodiversity standard under this at the moment. We're hoping that that will come out in consultation quite soon. And that will help to give confidence for those wanting to get involved in these nature markets that we really are delivering to the highest standard that we expect. The idea of this is really to kickstart and help these markets grow, because we're only going to see restoration of our natural environment if we see a significant increase in investment and time and effort into looking after nature. And we can do that, but we need these financial flows to run through to the people looking after these fantastic places. So keep an eye out for those. Really exciting opportunity to see those being developed. Let's move on to my last slide, if that's okay, please. So alongside our work with BSI, as part of the work of BSI, we have a group that comes together to look at all of the biodiversity standards. And one of the things we do is we feed into and engage with the International Standards Organization as well, as representatives from the British Standards group. Now, the three standards I wanted to pull out here are three that have been in development for a while, and you can see it says DIS, CD, and DIS after the ISO. That's different stages in the development process. We're going to pick out very quickly. We've got one on biodiversity for organizations and assessing biodiversity impacts at an organizational level. This links really nicely with what was mentioned earlier, this task force for nature-related financial disclosure, this corporate requirement. It's also coming through in Europe under another acronym, corporate requirement to set out the impacts and opportunities, the dependencies and risks associated with biodiversity for those businesses. So we've got a standard that's being developed there that's going to start talking about that organizational level work. We've also got a natural capital accounting for, standard. This, which is 17620, that is in well-developed draft at the moment. We're expecting that to come out later this year, I hope, for wider consultation. This is what's lovely about this is built off the back of the natural capital accounting for organization specification that's been produced by the BSI, and that was BS 8632 back in 2021, if my memory serves me. And the same people that led the development of that are now involved in leading the development of this internationally. And in a very similar way for the Biodiversity Net Gain work, the BSI standard for biodiversity net gain that was on the previous slides, for my first slide, that's now being used as a starting point for thinking about biodiversity net gain internationally and how we develop an approach for development projects for biodiversity net gain. And that, again, is in a well-developed draft and actually adds to and builds on what we've done in the UK. So really exciting that all of these are coming forward. And my last point before I pass back to Dan is just to say there's a great opportunity if you're involved in this work area, if you are involved in biodiversity work, biodiversity net gain, we would love to hear from you, because we do need people to engage in and develop these, help and input into these standards. There's a lot of work being done internationally and it's falling on relatively few people's shoulders, but they could be really impactful in terms of how this takes shape and how the standards start to land. So if there are volunteers, we'd love to hear from you as well. Dan, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Tom. And it's great to hear, to see that you actually recognize all the numbers of the standards. Thank you for that. And thank you for mentioning the Nature Investment Standards Program. That really is a groundbreaking program where the UK is leading. And in general, I think it's good to realize that a lot of the work that's been done in the UK is brought into the international standard system, and there are a few number of countries in the world that are leading on all these international efforts on biodiversity, and the UK is one of them, and we're very happy and glad and fortunate that Tom is working with us on that. So thank you, and just one more point. To Tom's point, if you're interested to joining one of those international groups or development processes, please do get in touch with us. Our email addresses are at the last slide, and we are more than happy to put you in touch with the responsible person in the international standards community. Right, thank you so much. Now, we have about a little bit under 50 minutes left for Q&A. And we received a number of questions from participants when they registered for this webinar. And I would just like to suggest starting this part with one of these questions for each of the panelists. And then we move on to some of the questions that we received from the audience. And thank you in advance for all those questions. That's great. I'm going to start with Julia. Julia, we have a question from Jane, and obviously I will not mention the surnames, but Jane, I hope you're here online, and I really love the question because it's a very practical question. And her question is, I mostly undertake garden design for private residential clients, but occasionally I take on landscape design projects for commercial clients. How do I navigate B&G for these clients?
I know, Jane, if you're here. So firstly, welcome to the B&G family. I mean, thank you so much. It's such a lovely join up. It actually relates to the that point that I made about the government guidance about the project design. So as a B&G ecologist, we simply cannot do B&G on our own. We absolutely can't. You know, we need to work really closely with landscape architects, with landscape designers, because to be frank, you've been doing this a long time. Ecology profession has tended to be surveying species and, you know, bats and dormice, and now we're designing woodlands for 30 years. Are you kidding me? So welcome. You do need that ecology input, especially for the biodiversity net gain. There's the metric that Adrian you mentioned, and there's like trading rules, and there's a lot of good practice that comes with that. And ecologists, you know the tricks. You know, how do we create those wildlife rich habitats for wildlife? You know, they'll be able to say, well, look, there's particular species in the local biodiversity action plan, and these are the kind of resources that they need all year round. But it's that lovely join up, and actually Adrian, that the guide that we put together in terms of good practice for mandatory biodiversity net gain, the first part is the join up between landscape architects and the ecologist. So Jane, a couple of things. Firstly, find a B&G ecologist, and a really good one. You know, grab them for coffee and download. Just ask them about biodiversity net gain. Tom and I run the training courses for SAIM on B&G. We get a lot of landscape designers come on that, which is fantastic. So you're very welcome to search for the training courses. We're going to shout out to SAIM for that and work on that. The Landscape Institute has some good resources for landscape architects about biodiversity net gain, but it's that join up approach. You know, we should always be doing this. And I love the fact that biodiversity net gain is coming to say, hey team, join up from the start.
Yes, sorry about that. Thank you, Julia. That's great. Thank you for answering this question, and I really hope, that this answers your question. I'm going to go to the second pre-submitted question, and that's a question for Adrian, and it's a question from Ellie. And Ellie is asking, how does B&G work with sites with no biodiversity baseline value? So how do you measure without a baseline value?
Thank you for the question. First of all, I realized that there's something I didn't say during my presentation, which is critical, is I am very well surrounded in this webinar. Tom and Julia actually are the author of the Biodiversity Principle Guidelines document that we released at Syria back in 2019. So they are the technical experts. However, for the question here that you just asked, so from my understanding, of course, 10% of 0% is still 0%. So it's a bit tricky, right? What I could find out is that in that case, it would be a case-by-case basis, and it would be working with a local planning authority. And the first thing to do is probably to check with the local planning if there are actually goals or predefined values that have been decided at the local plan level for those sites that have a zero value of biodiversity. So it's probably a way of thinking about it is not so much about trying to achieve a percentage, but it's about to achieve a number of biodiversity units on top of the proposed developments. And of course, working in coordination with your local planning authority, they will probably have some thought on that as well. Tom, Julia, did I cover that okay?
Yeah, brilliantly. There is the de minimis exemption, I guess we should mention. So absolutely, Adrian, you know, you can't get a percentage from zero. So you can look to increase the numerical value. But under the hard line of the law, you just need to check if you're exempt from mandatory biodiversity net gain. So there's an element of, it's called the de minimis threshold, if you're not impacting a certain size of habitat. So if you have a completely zero baseline, it's worth checking that de minimis threshold. But absolutely,
Great.
always strive to do something. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Let's move on to the third question. And the third question is for Tom, and it's a question from David. And the question is, are there mandatory requirements for biodiversity net gain being promoted across any of the other UK countries, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland? And what are they, or are there any targets? Tom.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I think it's really important to flag that when we're talking about biodiversity net gain, we often end up talking about the English legislation. Biodiversity net gain is much wider than that. And the international standard, of course, is not about the English legislation. And our British standard is not about the English legislation. It's about how we deliver benefits for biodiversity, net gain for biodiversity, however we want to talk about it, through development. And we've got some fantastic work going on across the UK and actually across Europe. We've got net benefits for biodiversity in Wales, and they've got a DECA approach that talks about diversity and connectivity and condition as well. And we want to see enhancements across each of these elements. We've got, in Scotland, we've got securing positive effects for biodiversity in the most recent framework, and they're reviewing and doing a whole piece of work on appropriate metrics to assess change. And we've got similar things in Germany where we've got standards starting to come through. We've got pieces in France coming through, and Sweden as well has been tested in different cities. So yes, actually, to some degree, we're the 101st, roughly, country to put in place something on biodiversity net gain legally. Julia was absolutely right. England was the first where it said, right, here's a very specific metric and here's 10% net gain. But there are loads of countries that have set out steps towards that. Just tends to be slightly narrower than what England has done. So yes, it's coming. It's coming through, and it has a different name in different places, but it's absolutely coming, and it results in the same ambition and same way of working, which is, what do we start with? How are we minimizing, avoiding, minimizing, compensating for those? And how do we deliver a gain or a benefit for biodiversity at the end of that?
Great, thank you so much, Tom. And I really hope that answers your question, David. And in the meantime, I've been looking at all the questions coming in, and thank you so much for them. It's going to be very challenging, if not impossible, to answer all these questions in the next 6 minutes. There's one that really struck me. There's a question, and I think that's a question to perhaps all of you, but can the guests clarify what they expect will happen after the 30 years, right? So the development will still be there, but the legal requirement and the management of the mitigation habitat has expired. So what is there to stop the land from being reverted back to arable use or developed? Which I think is a really interesting question. So who can I invite to have a take on that one?
Shall I start and then
Thank
pass
you.
around to others? Yeah. So I think the first thing to say is that there are existing legal measures to stop people destroying high quality areas of biodiversity. So if you've got a piece of pasture, a grazing land that's been under grazing for a long time, then it becomes permanent pasture and you're not meant to plough it up without approval. Likewise, if you've got a woodland and you're cutting it down, you need felling licenses. So there are existing things in place that provide some level of protection. The other piece is the second piece point I wanted to make out of three is that when you get to that end point, there's actually very often opportunities for further enhancement, for further improvement of that site, which means that you could sell more units from it that will allow you to get another 30 years worth of agreement. Or better still, you've delivered further benefits than you sold just because you did a really good job. And so you've got extra units at the end of it that you can then manage for another 30 years. That's the second point. So there's actually real opportunity there. The third point is we're 6 months in. We're not far in, and 30 years. I mean, think about what happened 30 years ago and what was going on and what the policy environment is like, let alone our lives are like. I couldn't have done this. I dreamt of doing this type of thing when I was in school, talking to everybody via a computer. Things will have changed dramatically in that 30 years. So I think we should be heading in that direction. Think about it, absolutely, but we shouldn't be overly worried about it. It's a long time. We've got plenty of time to get that right.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to comment on this one, or shall I quickly move to the... I'm going to move to one last question before I wrap up, which is going to be challenging now. So there are a few questions in the chat around integrity. And the questions are around if people have some thoughts on developing the market integrity needed for biodiversity net gain, either through government consultations, to market-led, or other things. So what are your thoughts about integrity and biodiversity net gain? Or is that a too broad question?
No, it's really essential. I can jump in because it relates really closely to the work that Tom and yourself mentioned about so we know that the government isn't regulating the nature markets, so the only way that this will be successful if we establish that the standards, the benchmarks. Otherwise, we know from the carbon markets, from other environmental markets, how they just don't work. And there's so many examples internationally where things have fallen down without this framework. So it is, it's such a great question because we cannot underestimate the importance of that. And the thing that does, people always look at, it's to secure biodiversity gain. Actually, from my side, is to secure bioconfidence. So at the moment, there's such a lack of confidence. It's like, Julie, I'm not going to go to B&G Finder. We're a big infrastructure project. Isn't there someone else? Well, not at the moment, no. So to build that bioconfidence is a well-trusted market. Then you get that flow of private investment into grassroots conservation projects, and that's what we need. Because at the moment, I have clients who are like, I'm just going to do it ourselves. I think, yes, I understand that, but you're an infrastructure provider. I would rather we have that flow into the hands of people who do this for a day job, and they don't trust it. So it's absolutely needed to secure biodiversity net gain and to have that flow into the right conservation projects. But from where I stand, we won't get private investment in nature without it.
Yeah. Thank you. I love that word, bioconfidence. I really like that one. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's a good point. So we do have a number of questions left, but I'm afraid we're approaching the end of the webinar, and I'm very keen to finish on time. This has been a great discussion, a rich discussion, and thank you for that. We covered B&D policy development in England, the link to the Environmental Act, how this is a world first, what is required for biodiversity net gain, what are the opportunities to go beyond B&D. We touched upon the Nature Investment Standards Program, on international standards development within ISO. And to all participants, I really hope these insights will be valuable as we move forward, achieving a nature positive outcomes in the built environment sector. So I want to thank you all for attending this webinar, and we really appreciate your time and attention. And in particular, I want to thank our amazing panelists, Julia and Adrian and Tom, for sharing their insights and their knowledge and their answers. And we really all encourage you to take the next step by downloading the BSI little book on Biodiversity Net Gain. And if you're interested, to contact us to learn more about how you and your organization can join the important process of developing standards for a nature positive future, either national or international. So please feel free to reach out to us with any questions, with any feedback or any comments. Today was the first day of the BSI Net Zero Week. Please have a look at the BSI website in case you're interested to join more net zero related webinars. Once again, thank you all for being with us today. This has been a great afternoon and we look very much forward to continuing the conversation. I wish you all a lovely rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much.